All right, so our first panel this morning is, let me scroll this thing down a little bit so I can make sure I get the, it's MiCA in transition, how CASP or crypto asset service providers should prepare for the 2025-26 licensing deadline, excuse me. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna pass it around to, starting on this side, and let them introduce themselves. And then we'll get back to me and I'll make the intro again and we'll start answering questions. How's that? All right, sir, please.
Good, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie. I work here with Erica. We're part of a specialist crypto team, mainly comprised of people who were senior lawyers in the crypto firm. So it's an ex-Binance, Coinbase, Aave group of people who are supporting a lot of the firms in this room and more broadly. So thanks to Merkle Science for being here.
Hi all, I'm Azariah Nukajam. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I work with Gemini. I look after their regulatory and compliance operations in the UK and within the last year across Europe. Gemini is licensed under MiCA, and so I've been sort of guiding the business's regulatory and policy strategy around positioning within the markets and also engaging with regulators. I've worked in sort of crypto sector for the past 5 years, but spent the last 2 at Gemini. And prior to that, I was in the funds and asset management sector for 10, 11 years.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Racheal Muldoon. I'm a partner at Charles Russell Speechlys. And what do? I've been a barrister for the past 10 years, hung up my wig and gown after making several waves, for good and for bad, in the crypto world. And I now support my wonderful clients in restructuring their operations all over the world as the regulators change their mind.
Very interesting. So I've sat on a lot of panels over the last 10, 11 years in crypto, and I don't know if I've ever been on a panel that has this much skill and expertise. So we appreciate the panel. So the intro here, MiCA's transitional period was designed to give crypto asset service providers breathing room. But in practice, the deadlines are uneven, national approaches differ, and early licensees are already feeling the weight of supervision. The session unpacks what firms should be doing now, mapping national timelines, preparing applications before regulators face a last-minute rush. We've seen that in Singapore. And keeping AML and travel rule obligations watertight during a transition. Panelists will explore the practical lessons from early movers and the pitfalls of waiting too long. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And I'm going to throw out the first question. Azariah has so graciously said that she would take a lot of these questions, but I'm going to start with this fine gentleman and end here. How are member states interpreting MiCA's transitional provisions differently, and what legal or regulatory pitfalls could arise from this uneven approach?
Yeah, well, I think you called out the timing approach, and it goes to the heart of this. This is supposed to be harmonized regulation. So the benefit of this is you get licensed once, you have access to all member states in the EU. Was it in the last month, France has said that it may not be satisfied with the licenses that are given by the member states. So that's an enormous issue with the whole concept behind this. I think it maybe helps a lot of crypto folks in the room here. Where does MiCA come from? So if you think about regulators, they're not generally people who've got a lot of time on their hands who are going to come to you guys and say, thank you for this amazing thing that you've created. How can we help? They're under pressure, they're under-resourced, so they pull off the shelf the closest looking regulation to the thing that they should be applying to the new thing, and then copy-paste and put some new definitions in. So if you're in a bank, this is extremely familiar stuff. MiCA is essentially a copy of MiFID, the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive. And if you're in a bank, you've been complying with MiFID for 10 plus years since the global financial crisis. So this is relatively easy, even leaving aside grandfathering provisions. When we're talking to crypto firms, and I think Racheal and I probably get asked the same questions constantly, which is, which jurisdiction should we go for and why? And That is not a question that you would be asked by a bank. Banks look across markets on a much a longer time frame. They enter markets in a very orderly fashion, and they would spend a lot of time with their home regulator and the local regulator before they do that. Crypto is different, and crypto people move fast. So I think calling out the headlines around this, on that choice of where do you go, because the practical implication of this difference is where do you go? If you're a bank, it's easy, because you'd likely get grandfathered in by some friendly local regulator. If you're a large crypto firm, and I'm intrigued to hear your answer to this question, there's probably an obvious answer, because if you've got a money laundering registration, then you have a home regulator. You should have a good relationship with your supervisor. If you don't have the money laundering registration, then you have got this kind of range of markets. So you're weighing up, is a smaller jurisdiction going to be able to move quicker? You'll have better access to the regulator, but give you the risk that the larger jurisdictions, and France is now saying the quiet part out loud, are not going to give you market access that you're anticipating. And then you're mapping that against the cost of compliance versus the value of the revenues that you're going to get. So all of these is, for each jurisdiction, you've got a grid and a map. How long does it take? How likely are we to get the license? What does it cost to get the license? What does it cost to keep the license?
I think you hit it. That's the paradigm we're in. Like, where do we operate? How fast can we start operating? And where's the less regulation we get to? That seems to be the crypto world.
And if it costs 10 and you predict that you're going to make 9, then you shouldn't do it.
You've pretty much kind of hit the nail on the head for a lot of the challenges that crypto asset firms face when they think about MiCA authorizations and the jurisdictions in which they might choose to operate. I'm taking a step back from what Gemini is doing, I'll come onto that later. I think that generally when crypto asset service providers are thinking about jurisdiction, often they look at the transition period that has been applied within that local jurisdiction. Most crypto asset service providers, not all, will have been registered as VASPs in whichever jurisdiction, and each of those jurisdictions would have their own interpretation of the rules that should apply to crypto asset firms. So take Germany, for example. A lot of the crypto asset VASPs were registered or kind of in some ways supervised under the banking rules. But if you take Ireland, on the other hand, VASPs would have been subject to AML requirements, and for the most part, that would have been it. And so the starting point, the sort of distance between where a firm would be in their local jurisdiction and where they need to get to under MiCA is shorter or longer, depending on which jurisdictions they are registered as VASPs in. So for those firms that are registered as VASPs in lighter touch, if you will, jurisdictions, they might find that they start to forum shop. They look for jurisdictions that allow a longer window for transition, 18 months, say, instead of the 12, or in some cases 6, that we've seen in the past. And this is to allow them really to start to familiarize themselves with what it means to be regulated. And I think for crypto firms specifically, the risks that they face with these kind of disparity in approach in relation to the transition period is that often they underestimate the work that is required to become fully supervised, authorised under the MiCA regime. It extends beyond AML. They start to think about concepts that are very foreign to them, such as like having adequate internal organisational arrangements or putting in place a robust risk governance framework, operating within 3 lines. Oh, so sorry.
Don't worry, my voice is going to go next. I sang a bit too hard.
I think
Simply Red concert last night. So
I think I'm coming down with something. So sorry. But yes, dealing with conduct of business matters, maintaining regulatory capital, etc. There is a lot to consider. And with that sort of lack of exposure and experience to operating in a regulated environment, you find that a lot of crypto, and crypto specifically, crypto asset players find themselves kind of a little bit beyond their depth and maybe overstretched and starting to kind of scramble to get their minds around what it means to continue to offer their products and services in a regulated way.
Very good. I mean, that we could probably talk most of the day just on, one of these questions versus all the questions we have here. We probably won't get to all the questions, by the way. We're taking good time to flesh this out, and I really appreciate it because that's what we need to do. But I have a question for the barrister here, which is, this is kind of a loaded question, but I think you can take it off here. What are the risks of relying on transitional authorization, versus pushing immediately for a MiCA license? So what kind of risk are you running there if you just go for it?
Well, it's my role to be the Grim Reaper, isn't it? It's you want to see me once when you need me, but then you don't want to see me again. No, it's thankfully that's now changed. But look, I think for the reasons that we've explored just now, the transitional regime under MiCA is a minefield. Absurdly so. I was in Jersey last week. Of course, Jersey being a Crown Protectorate under the UK is outside of the scope of MiCA. Query, however, if that could change in the next 100 days. Might there be competitive advantage to them opening the jurisdiction? Watch this space. But back on topic. So, a minefield. We know that there are different transitional periods between 5 to 18 months. What does that mean in real terms? Well, take, for instance, France. France applies the maximum 18-month transition. This lets legacy CASPs operate until July of 2026 before requiring full MiCA authorization. However, the Netherlands, Poland only allow 6 months, which is now passed. This requires compliance or shutdown. So, this mismatch means this. CASP compliance in France could be illegal in the Netherlands, as it currently stands, because of that lack of alignment. So the risks as I see them are twofold. They're commercial and regulatory. So misaligned expiry dates can make a CASP compliant, as I say, in one member state, but not in another. So another example, a CASP active in both Austria, of course, providing for 12 months, and Croatia, 18 months, might have to suspend operations in Austria before Croatia due to this conflict. Again, it's utter madness commercially. It delays pan-EU rollout. This also causes issues in law. There's ambiguity in the quote-unquote lawful pre-MiCA activity. Ultimately, regulators may later dispute whether your service is in fact qualified, especially for custody, staking, and advisory functions. There is therefore, again, putting my wig back on, that retrospective enforcement risk, and I can't overstate this risk. I know what you're thinking, lawyer, Grim Reaper, but we all have to be live to this because it will come. They have to fund this operation somehow. Where do we think those funds are going to come from? So there's also an added commercial risk and further legal ambiguity in what I call gold plating. Now, some states have added local requirements that arguably surpass those required in MiCA. For instance, in Poland, and this transitional status may be revoked retroactively, we simply don't know. So I think the takeaways for me are as follows, that CASPs need to build a market-specific roadmap, if they haven't already. They need to maintain active dialogue with regulators. I've represented 5 global financial regulators in this space, including in FTX. They're not always as bad as they may seem. Of course, I have to say that. And implement robust cross-border regulatory frameworks for the reason that Charlie mentioned. Clients come to us, they want that regulatory arbitrage. A lot of thought needs to go into that because you don't want to invest all of your operations, people, on the ground, only to find that you lose in 6 months.
Well, that's interesting. You have different jurisdictions with different rules, all under the same rule. right? So, I mean, it doesn't make all that sense. It kind of feels like the U.S. just a year ago, all these very unclear rules, right? But I do have a question. Listening to you talk, I thought to myself, if you are a CASP, not a VASP, what FATF would name it, a CASP, and you are at 17 months and you're just not quite ready there, does that mean at 18 months you're done? You're out of the business?
Time to get talking to that regulator. And us, of course, the lawyers in the room. Get us all in the same room and, you should be okay.
Good.
Just if I may add one comment around the kind of commercial risks. So a key advantage of going for full authorization, at least for Gemini, was the access to passporting. And if you are a VAS with ambitious growth objectives, you may wish to start to think about your cross-border strategy and how you kind of plan to continue to distribute your services across all of the EU, whilst other players are still doing the thinking and preparing their applications. I think that puts you at, a commercial advantage over others. Because the transition period, of course, doesn't afford for passporting rights.
Very good. Charles, you want to weigh in on that? You look like you're in agreement, but maybe not.
Building on a couple of those points, I think it's apparent that there's been a lack of engagement from the regulators in a way that would be supportive to the firms that are already there. So famously, Poland was one of the easiest and quickest places to get a VASP. So lots of small firms are in Poland. And as Racheal describes, it's now a place you don't want to be because it's got a short runway and the regulator has been relatively slow to get off the ground. I think the point that you're making about the US is significant in the context of what happens on the ground, because, as we're saying, it's expensive to be compliant in Europe. So there is the advantage to those that get there first and are big names. There are relatively few home crypto exchanges in Europe. Bitpanda is the obvious example of a large one. And it has the BaFin engagement. So Austria, Germany are its home territories, and it has its licensing there. But a lot of the firms are US firms, and you can make a lot of money with a lot less trouble in the US these days. So the regulators are putting firms in a position where it's not as easy as it was a couple of years ago to think that Europe is a good place to do business. This also drives M&A activity. So you're seeing, if you're a relatively small firm, you're seeing the cost of compliance going up and up and up. And speaking in the UK, I think we got estimates from the FCA, once we've been through the new 2026 rules, could be about £90 million to be compliant in the UK. That's bank type compliance costs. Is anyone making more than £90 million from their crypto activities? That this is just going to be an amount of money that they can sail through, write the checks and have no problem. So I think all of us in our dialogue with regulators individually and through industry bodies are saying, you do risk killing it. We understand the point about standards, but it's going to be a commercial perspective too. So there's starting to be a roll-up of firms that have got a window to sell themselves before these significantly high costs come. And even large firms, I think, building on the point about the value of licensing, Bitstamp was well known for having a lot of licenses. So being bought by Robinhood has a lot of money. It's a US firm entering this market. So you can start to see it's not just the regulatory implications that impact, the commercial implications of what actually drives what people do.
Yeah, I think you answered the next question as well. So day-to-day challenges of compliance, staffing, and systems. 90 million pounds. That's a lot of money. I don't know who's going to just come up with $90 million. I mean, there's obviously companies that can do it, but that's a substantial barrier to getting into the markets. And it almost feels like there's picking winners and losers. by some extent.
I think it's cultural as well, that if you're a crypto firm that's been outside regulation, you may be surprised by things that are as part of day-to-day life for the TradFi firms. So what the regulators call vertical integration, and the crypto firms, sometimes that's unnatural to them. But when you say to them, don't let the trading desk know what's about to get listed, they're like, okay. But if they say to a regulator, what's vertical integration, that is not going to go down well. So this is the point that you're making. I should hand back to you for the policies and procedures.
You want to take a shot at that? Day-to-day challenges of compliance, staffing, and systems. I mean, what causes you the most heartache day to day?
I think operational readiness is a big challenge, and I think you've called out most of the pertinent points around the challenges that we see. How do you streamline your processes, your people, your systems in such a way that allows sort of the most efficiency, whilst also being proportionately compliant? And I think for firms that are, particularly those VASPs that are sort of mostly just operating in a largely unregulated way, there's a lot of work to be done from an educational standpoint on how to set up your internal environment beyond just having policies and procedures in place. And that also speaks to a lot of the challenges that firms will likely meet at the authorizations gateway, because, for example, you may have a fantastic policy on how you custody your client's assets, but the regulators, depending on where you choose to be authorized, will have practical experience and knowledge of how that works in practice, and they will want to know from you how you are going to evidence that you are keeping your own firm assets distinct and separate and easily identifiable and redeemable upon request from the assets of, or rather, clients' assets from the assets belonging to firms. I think also for a long time, firms have seen compliance as being an AML CTF issue, and so that learning around the various conduct of business specific risks, or like prudential sort of regulatory capital risks that they might be potentially exposed to, is difficult to manage, I think, and is also can be difficult to bring everyone along that journey. It takes time, rather. So.
Yeah, that's very true in the industry that we're in, the crypto industry. And like Charles said earlier, we see like pre-canned policies, and they from the TradeFi world come over and they're like, okay, this is what we're going to do, but the regulator, if they're good at what they're doing and they understand what they're into in crypto, they're going to say that doesn't work, and they're going to know that right away. So you need to make sure you're looking at your risk and then assigning the policy correctly and doing the policy correctly.
Absolutely. Just using a practical example that I've seen from regulators around operational resilience, operational risk management, etc. The regulator will ask you, they will take a look at your operational risk policy, and they'll say, oh, this is interesting. You've identified all of your important business services. You have set thresholds. You have undertaken some scenario testing. We can see you landed at 4 for this particular threshold. How did you get there? How did you decide that this business service is most important or more important than these that you have discounted? What sort of testing did you do? And then, kind of play back to you their understanding of your own business model. And for a lot of firms, like for the first time, it's at the gateway is the first time they start to think about the practical implications of what they put down on paper. So it can be tricky.
Yeah, it's a little late at that time.
Yes.
It's a little late.
Yeah.
This is a perfect question for you, and we've kind of dug around it a little bit, but in MiCA, if I'm saying it correctly, I think you said MiCA earlier, but MiCA.
It varies.
It varies.
Go with it.
Where you're from, right? What legal questions under MiCA still need clarity before 2026? And how should CAS prepare for potential regulatory surprises like when this actually comes into full effect, what's going to be the elephant in the room, knocking on the door and was saying, I didn't realize that was part of this.
Gosh, the list is endless right now, I think, isn't it? Well, I think starting first with the scoping of grey zones, as I call them, it's where do DeFi, staking as a service, where do NFTs actually sit? Where are they? I've asked many a regulator this. The Jersey financial regulator gave me a pretty clear answer, but of course they're still outside of scope for now. But also cross-border oversight. How far can host regulators go in demanding that local licensing or imposing extra supervision? But how far will they go within the remit of MiCA? Technical standards, we've already explored custody, security, governance, ESG, and market abuse surveillance rules. Again, guidance in draft form, no real clarity there. AML overlap, integration between MiCA duties, and of course the EU's new AML framework. In the dark and distant past, I contributed to the drafting of the 5th AMLD, which was fun and games. Sorry, everyone. But yeah, preparation of that playbook, as I'm sure we'll turn to next, it is going to be very much built around that ambiguity. But what do we actually know here? What's strategic? And just 2 points on the last question. I think the first is I'm seeing those national competent authorities really drill down into the credentials of senior managers. That is a real hot topic at the moment. Think of it in the auspices of the senior manager certification regime. They need to know that your leadership team are squeaky clean. And by squeaky clean, it's literally getting to the point of internet history, kind of squeaky clean. So yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. And again, engagement with regulators. Get ahead of the game. Have those parallel silos for authorization. Don't do it consecutively.
Interesting, thank you. Sounds about clear as mud, right? Just about, okay. So we are just about 5 minutes before this panel is okay, is about to conclude. But
the fire alarm is about to be tested.
That's the MiCA alarm.
Attention, please. Attention, please. Please leave the building immediately. Please leave the building immediately by the nearest exit. Do not use the lifts.
Attention, please.
Nearly
Attention, please. The fire alarm test is now complete. Please respond to all future fire alarms.
So you all passed the fire alarm test, you can collect a certificate.
yeah. So I guess they come on next time and they're screaming, "Get out! It's a real fire." So we have about 5 minutes. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you so much. It's not often you get this caliber in front of you on this topic, so that was really interesting. And at the risk of the usual audience monologue, I'm not going to go on about the whole history of what we do. But I'm really curious because it felt like a lot of the discussion, maybe it's just my point of view, centers around centralized exchanges. Right? And as you mentioned yourself, DeFi is currently out of scope, but there are a lot of providers out there who are essentially building software on top of this with decentralized non-custodial wallets, like us. And we tried to get a license like 3 years ago in the UK as a startup, and we just gave up. Like after a year and a lot of money, we just gave up and we changed our model to decentralized wallets and basically being more of a software service. And we found home in some jurisdictions. They're cool with that. We're really close to Vara, for example, in Dubai, and they're totally fine with that. They don't actually crazy. They don't think we need a license, right? But like now that we're looking to go to other like jurisdictions, we're really confused as to how to comply. Because we use great stuff. We use Merkle. We use KYC. We use KYB. We use AML. We use all these processes. So we think we're checking all the boxes, but we don't transmit. We don't hold. So where do we sit? You know, it's like it's these kind of software companies that are trying to do the traditional SaaS model, leaning on other stacks to build something different and new. It feels like we're even further outside the box. And like, you know, and you mentioned like there's retroactive aspects. So they might come back to us and go, naughty boys, you know, what have you been doing? So like, do we just stop or do we keep building or like, you know, because we don't have access to regulators, so we're not big enough for that.
Sure. You've made a great start. You've just made your case. So let's formalise that and let's put it before the regulators.
We have, and some have accepted it, but like when we tried with the UK, they were just, I'll be really honest, I'm sorry if it offends anyone in the room, but we got such stupid conversations that we just were like, you just don't get this at all.
I have a fair few thoughts on that, and I might take that offline to avoid any controversy. But I think a huge part of the issue is the government HM Treasury, legislators, policymakers simply do not have the depth of knowledge to engage in the ways that we would find meaningful. And that comes across in a lot of, not so much now, I think they've improved. There has been an educational kind of journey over the last year and a half. But I remember a few years back when we would meet with the regulators, and I can use staking, for example, and the point around like decentralized staking versus those that are caught within the regulatory perimeter. We would explain how certain types of infrastructure and models work and what keeps staking activities out of scope versus what brings them in scope. And we would try our best to explain the risks in a way that like is really kind of, we felt at the time, obvious. But those conversations ended up sort of, one, falling on deaf ears, and two, they weren't sort of bilateral. They were more, and it was us industry educating policymakers. And once you do that, once you give them the educational piece and you help them to really understand the risks and how to like effectively manage them, you have to then give them time to go away and think about how they will apply the policy, the rules, the legislation. That takes time, and I appreciate the frustration, but my personal view, not speaking on behalf of Gemini here, my personal view is keep innovating, keep building. Technology is the future. That is the direction of travel. And when you look at the sort of economic impact of the great work that those in the DeFi space are doing to attract investment into the UK and to attract the biggest talent into the UK, etc. I think it's a net win and net positive for the government policymakers, even if they don't see it right now.
I still want to go to jail.
I appreciate that.
I think a perfect answer. And I'd say all hope might not be lost because things are moving on. Interestingly, given we're talking about MiCA, perhaps less so in Europe. I think all regulators started out with the position that anyone claiming to be decentralized was simply a firm that should be regulated that was pretending to be something else. That may still be the view in policy rooms in Europe. It's not in the UK. So I don't doubt that you had that experience for the reasons that Azariah has been setting out. But it is now different. And my anecdotal experience of this is I was asked by the UK regulator about 18 months ago to convene a bunch of DeFi firms because they wanted to understand what was going on. And the DeFi firms said, no way. If we tell them what we're doing, they're going to ban it. We are now having those conversations, and the FCA is, I think, open-minded about the fact that it's difficult to be truly decentralized. I think I would often say to people who tell me they're decentralized, if they can show me that they've spent many years and millions of dollars, then I might believe them. If they're telling me that it's the two of them who are sitting there in front of me at the time, I'd be more skeptical. So I think regulators are right to be skeptical, but they do accept that there is such a thing as true decentralization, and it has value, and it should be welcomed into the markets. And I think it's recognized in the more TradFi context, so they can understand this. If we think about custody, Fireblocks is a software company. Zodia Custody provides regulated services. So no one in the regulator is has any misapprehension about that. And I think we are getting there. It would be different.
Yeah, just very, very quickly endorse all of those points. Spot on. And look, no two regulators are created equally. They're really not. Without naming names, and we'll pick it up afterwards. Diagrams help, I find. Pictures help. They love a good flow chart, don't they? It's You know, like many a judge, and I can understand that. So look, I will say this in my personal capacity. The UK is committing the U-turn of all U-turns on crypto right now. I'm still recovering from Andrew Bailey, the governor's opinion in the FT, and haven't really slept much since, I must say, because whatever happened to the qualifying stablecoin taxonomy? What's happened to the holdings cap on stablecoins, I ask? Between £10,000 and £20,000 per individual and 10 million per firm? Have we just forgotten about that? So we're not going to include that in the new stablecoin framework. It is all unraveling. So maybe now is the time to strike.
Yeah, I think we'll have to cut it there. Brilliant panel here this morning. If you have questions for them, please remember the faces, hit them up, and I'm sure they'll give you some great advice, or if not advice so much as thoughts. Thoughts, right? We don't really give advice like that. So this is the end of this panel. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes, I think.